Welcome to this deep dive where we take a closer look at the stories and ideas shaping things.
Today, we're diving into a recent interview with Fritz Barend on Pound News.
That's right. He got some really strong feelings, didn't he, about the May 4th World War II commemoration here in the Netherlands?
Yeah, and it touches on quite a few current issues as well. The interview title itself gives you a clue. Fritz Barend Wosest. Furious.
Cult World. Yeah, that definitely signals strong emotion.
Right. So our goal here, our mission, if you like, is to try and understand his perspective.
Exactly. Why the pushback against, making the commemoration maybe more inclusive?
And how does this tie into his views on anti-Semitism, Israel, Palestine?
And just his general take on current events through this lens of remembrance.
Okay, so let's get into it. How does he kick things off in the interview?
Well, pretty much with that word cultiworld, expressing real frustration. He feels he can't commemorate May 4th in the way he thinks is right.
And he connects that feeling directly to what he sees as a rise in anti-Semitism globally. And he specifically brings Israel into it very early on.
So for Barend, May 4th is obviously more than just a date on the calendar.
Oh, absolutely. It's deeply personal. He talks about remembering the 105,000 Dutch Jews, the 6 million Jews murdered overall in the Holocaust.
And not just them.
No, also the Roma and Sinti people and the resistance fighters. And he makes a really crucial point. He emphasizes they were targeted for who they were.
Not for anything they did.
Precisely. Just for their identity.
And his own family's story is woven into this, isn't it?
Very much so. He speaks about his parents having to go into hiding with Jelas and Jelshivris and someone named Audra.
Right.
And you can hear the gratitude. He feels he owes his freedom, his life to their courage. That really anchors his whole viewpoint.
Okay, so that's the foundation. Now, the core of his objection, what's he resisting exactly?
He's resisting what he calls a forced inclusion of other conflicts into those 2 minutes of silence on May 4th.
Which conflicts does he mention?
He lists Chechnya, the Uyghurs, Karabakh, the Tat people, and Gaza.
And the focus on Gaza seems to particularly bother him.
Yes, he calls it Jewish baiting. He questions why Gaza, specifically now when other massive conflicts, like he points out the Syrian civil war with maybe 600,000 deaths,
Weren't included previously in the same way.
Exactly. That timing and focus make him suspicious.
Now, the official committee, the 4 and 5 May committee, they have been talking about inclusivity, right?
They have, yeah. And for a long time, they've acknowledged victims from the Dutch East Indies and Dutch soldiers, too. So there's been some broadening already.
But for Barend, this current push is different.
He feels it's wrong, too wide. He seems worried it dilutes the specific meaning of remembering the WWII victims in the Netherlands.
He also mentions his own experience leading commemorations.
Yeah, in Amstelveen. For years, he says, he focused specifically on Jewish, Roma, Sinti victims, and resistance fighters.
I mean, the reaction there.
He says people attending generally agreed with that focus. They understood it.
So that experience probably reinforces his current stance.
It seems to. It fuels his suspicion about why Gaza is being pushed now. He interprets it, rightly or wrongly, as an attempt to highlight perceived wrongs by Jewish people or Israel.
And he's quite blunt about his feelings towards those pushing for it.
Very. He says, I don't trust them anymore. It's clearly deeply emotional for him, tied to his family history.
He names an organization, the Rights Forum.
Yes, he points to them as being key advocates for this broader commemoration.
And he makes a pretty serious allegation about their ultimate goal.
He does. He suggests their aim is basically the removal of Israel from the map, citing what he believes are the intentions of surrounding nations. It's a very strong claim.
Now, he also says something quite surprising, perhaps, about Gaza before October 7th.
Yeah, this was striking. He claims he learned afterwards that life there. Well, he mentions 34 hospitals, bus lines, kids having a good time, future prospects.
It's not the usual narrative you hear.
No. He attributes the disruption entirely to Hamas and even suggests Palestinians were unhappy with Hamas, protesting their lack of interest in peace, protests which he says were met with violence.
That leads to the question of why Israel often gets more intense focus in the West compared to, say, the situation in Syria.
Right. The comparison between Israel, a democracy, albeit one he criticizes the government of, and Syria.
What's his take on that?
He acknowledges his issues with the current Israeli government, but he stresses Israel is a democracy and one he sees as constantly under attack, under threat.
Does he talk about what ordinary Israelis think?
He does. He says his own family in Israel desperately wants peace with Palestinians. He shares anecdotes like his nephew working alongside Palestinians, shopping in Palestinian areas.
Suggesting coexistence is already happening on some level.
On a people-to-people level, yes. He blames the conflict persisting on the leadership. Two idiots in policy, he calls them, meaning Netanyahu and Hamas.
So circling back to May 4th itself, what are his plans this year?
He's speaking in Alphen and An den Rijn. He says he's grateful for the chance, and he frames it again through his parents' experience. He's there because Dutch people hid them.
And his message will be
About the importance of offering refuge, respecting all human life, that core message. But the interviewer pushes back a bit, right? Plays devil's advocate.
yeah, brings up the rights forum again, their alternative commemoration in The Hague.
And their slogan, never again.
Exactly. The argument being, if you truly mean never again, you have to include Gaza, especially with the accusations of genocide flying around.
Yeah, Barron's response.
It's consistent. He asked, well, why weren't other genocides Chechnya, he mentioned again included before? Why Gaza now? He just pleads for those 2 minutes to remain focused.
Focused on the specific Dutch context of WWII.
Right, then he makes that comparison.
Yeah.
The really strong one.
Comparing Israel's actions against Hamas to the Allied bombings of German cities in World War II.
Yeah. What's the logic there, according to him?
He argues the goal in both cases is, or was, to eliminate the enemy. He regrets civilian casualties deeply, but places the responsibility on Hamas to seek peace, primarily by recognizing Israel.
It's a controversial analogy, certainly.
Definitely. The conversation also touches on the West Bank settlements.
What's his view? Should Jewish people live there?
He thinks creating formal settlements is wrong, but he draws a parallel with the 2 million Arab citizens inside Israel.
Suggesting Jewish individuals should be able to live in the West Bank, just not in organized settlements.
Kind of, yeah. As individuals, perhaps, like Arabs live in Israel. That seems to be his line of thought.
Then the discussion shifts a bit towards criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism task force comes up.
Yes, and concerns raised by people like Jose Strivers that any criticism of Israel gets labeled anti-Semitic too quickly.
Does Barron share that concern?
He says he does, and he gives a very personal example, his wife, Marieke Barron van Haften.
What happened there?
She apparently returned her university degree from the University of Amsterdam, the UVA, in protest against the UVA's stance on engaging with Israeli academic institutions.
Wow. And there was an incident related to this at the UVA.
Yeah, Barron describes masked individuals identified as pro-Palestine activists chanting anti-Israel slogans, preventing dialogue with academics who'd return their degrees.
He sounds pretty wary of that kind of confrontation.
He does. Expresses frustration they wouldn't engage in Dutch, even.
And there are broader allegations about the atmosphere at UVA.
Claims that Jewish students feel unsafe, face harassment, and that the university isn't setting clear boundaries. Barron calls it a gross scandal if anyone feels unsafe because of their background.
Is there any mention of support systems?
Briefly, yeah. A student rabbi, Janke, is mentioned as a resource. Barron just reiterates universities must be safe, respectful places for everyone.
Okay. Then there's a listener question posed to him. If Hamas is destroyed, is the conflict over?
His answer is pretty bleak, actually. He says no.
Why not? What does he think is needed?
Dialogue. But specifically, dialogue at the grassroots level. Between ordinary people in Gaza and Israel, the kind of interaction he believes existed before October 7th.
And leaders should follow that lead.
That's his hope, that leaders would eventually acknowledge and build on that progress from the ground up.
He also shares a personal wish, doesn't he?
Yeah, quite a touching one. He wants to travel to Israel with Moroccan friends.
As a symbol.
As a visible symbol, yeah, of Jewish and Muslim coexistence, showing it's possible.
There's also a quick update requested about Abdellah Nouri, the footballer.
Yes, Barron confirms he's being well cared for by his family, that he visits him, sees slight improvements, but he understandably keeps health details private.
Right. Now, going back to his earlier comments about feeling hated, he clarifies that.
He does. He says he doesn't hate, but he doesn't want to be hated. And crucially, he says he doesn't actually feel personally hated day to day.
Mentions positive interactions.
Yeah, anecdotes of support from the public, even from people wearing headscarves, he notes.
So he thinks the loud anti-Israel sentiment might be
a vocal minority. A very big mouth, he calls it. Not necessarily representative of the broader silent majority in the Netherlands, which he links to recent election results leaning right.
And he observed something about the makeup of the protests.
That many demonstrators aren't actually Muslim, but from far-left European groups. An interesting observation.
It's noticeable how his mood seems to change during the interview. Starts heavy, ends lighter.
Yeah, there's definitely a shift. He reflects on his life, calls it fantastic, loving family, but then pivots back to October 7th.
Calling it an unbelievable caesura.
A huge turning point, yeah. Bringing back visible anti-Semitism, fear about wearing Jewish symbols, stuff his mother warned him about years ago.
How does he cope with all this?
He mentions cycling, enjoying nice lunches with wine down in Spain, simple pleasures.
And a philosophical note.
Yeah, referencing that idea that life's about 4,000 weeks long. He reckons he's lived about 3,800 of them.
Puts things in perspective, makes time feel precious.
Definitely.
And his plans for May 5th? Liberation Day.
Celebrating freedom with family or friends, expressing gratitude again, this time to the Allied soldiers who liberated the Netherlands, and hoping for world peace.
And it ends on a truly light note.
Very light. A quick joke about Ajax winning the championship and the player Brobby. A moment of normal life after a heavy discussion.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive on Fitzbarron's interview, what are the main takeaways for you?
Well, you really hear his deeply personal, very strongly held views on commemorating WWII, his real concern about broadening Remembrance Day, how he sees that tied to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it's a mix of personal anguish, maybe some suspicion, but also, underneath it all, a kind of enduring hope, wouldn't you say?
I think so, yes, despite the frustration that comes through.
So this leaves us with a pretty significant question to ponder, doesn't it? How do we balance this desire for inclusive remembrance, acknowledging many different pains with preserving this specific historical context and meaning for particular communities?
It's a real tension. You want to acknowledge suffering broadly, but does that risk losing the focus on why specific events are remembered in a certain way? Like Barron argues for May 4th.
There are no easy answers there. It's something about how collective memory works, how we navigate different histories intersecting in the present.
Definitely food for thought. We hope listening to Barron's perspective, even if you don't agree with all of it, prompts some reflection on how we remember and why it matters so much.
Indeed. Something to think about as we navigate these complex issues today.